day that we call Father's Day, we come actually not worshiping necessarily our earthly fathers, but you, our Heavenly Father, is who we desire to worship. Not only just this day, Lord, but every day of our lives. And as we have gathered, we see it is raining, and we're thankful for that. We know that we need that to be able to sustain our lives here upon this earth. And Lord, as we have discussed, and many of us have it on our heart, for both Ted and Terry, we lift them up at this very time, asking that you might intercede on their behalf and make them as comfortable as possible, Lord, knowing your will would be done in all things. Lord, we would ask that you would bless our fellowship here this morning. Bless our pastor, that Brian can bring those things you place upon his heart, that we each might be able to participate and think of how much this gospel means to us. And Lord, I would ask too that you would be with Neil and Josh in this upcoming service at 11 or at 10:30. Bless all who gather this day is my prayer in Christ's name. Amen.
So I felt to sort of lead out our class with the question. This will sort of be our guiding question as we talk about over the course of weeks. How many weeks, we don't know. What does the Book of Mormon teach? And it's pretty open, pretty broad question. But I feel like this book that we have that is unique to the Restoration movement is so important. And when we read about the prophecies, promises, and covenants of the Lord as we get into the Book of Mormon, and you know those, but they're good reminders. We understand that the Book of Mormon plays a crucial role, a pivotal role in the things that are going to be coming in the last days. We also believe that the Book of Mormon is part of the fullness of the gospel. It's the plain, pure, and precious truth of the gospel, something that hasn't passed down and been translated from this to this to this to this, but was taken from plates and given an interpretation, and we have that interpretation. And it hasn't gotten filtered through generations of people and committees and all of that. The Book of Mormon is different from the Bible. They go together, right? But it hasn't been touched by man. And so as we talk about and get into specific parts of the Book of Mormon, we're really going to be thinking about that. So each week, we really need to think individually about, based on our discussion, what is it that stuck out to you that you can hold on to. So this hopefully will feel more like a class and not like a talk. So we got Moroni. This is sort of like a recreation picture, burying the plates, right? Hill Cumorah in New York. And a lot of trees on it, huh? Yeah. So it got me thinking about a story I heard on the radio not too long ago. There is a professor, and he wanted to see how long seeds would be viable underground. So he took seeds of different kinds of plants and put them in little vials with sand, and he buried them in the ground 140 some years ago. And every so many years, people at this university, they go and they dig them up, and they pull out the vials, and they take a few seeds out, and they plant them to see if they're viable or not, right? So 142 years ago, And then just last year, they did that. They opened it up, planted some seeds, and sure enough, after 142 years, some of them seeds are still good, right? And I just find it beautiful that the Lord sort of does this. He buries truth in the ground. He buries truth, and that truth gets uncovered when He's ready and when He wants it to. And part of that truth was the Book of Mormon, and we believe there's more truth yet. But the Lord sort of buries it there as a testimony, right? So that when it's uncovered later, right, we know that there is a plan. We know that there is truth there. And that's sort of what happened with the Book of Mormon, right? It was buried, right? It was buried, and it was there for 1,500 years or something. And at the due time of the Lord, it was brought out. And it brought fruit. So I think the Book of Mormon is it's so important. And we could spend years on that.
Not to get you sidetracked already, Brian, but
Yep.
you said just something that I had never, I guess, ever thought of before.
We're going to try to record the class, I think.
Well, is that the Book of Mormon has never been retranslated or remanufactured, or man has not tried to go back and reword like the Bible has for many years been translated and translated and translated and rewritten and rewritten and rewritten to where now we have, you walk into any Christian bookstore and there are hundreds of different versions of the Bible, and the Book of Mormon is still intact as it was when it was translated, to my understanding. Now, according to man, might have some little mishaps there, but still, it's still the original version.
It is, yeah.
Of what was translated. And I never really thought of that till you mentioned that over time, man has tried to dilute and simplify or conform the Bible to fit what they want it to be, whereas the Book of Mormon is still as the way it was, as God's Word.
Yep. And
in today's world, we know there's so much opposition to this because it bears truth. And so I don't know, I guess I was just slow and never thought of that before. So anyway, I just appreciate that comment.
I think that's important.
Kind of on the same lines, as you were talking, I was thinking about this too, that we know for a fact that they had the scriptures up through Isaiah. In fact, they quoted a large portion of Isaiah to let us know for a fact they already had those writings of Isaiah. But one of the things I've always found fascinating is they didn't add to those writings. And in fact, over and over again, in the inside of the Book of Mormon, we're told that it was done for a wise purpose in God. Both the translation, or how you want to say it, but the abridgment, more than one abridgment, in fact. An abridgment was made in Joseph Smith's day, but an abridgment was made in Moroni's day. And I've always found that fascinating that the original plates to this date have not been uncovered. So it's not like getting the Dead Sea Scrolls and getting that information. It was brought forth in a way that can only be accepted on faith. And I've always found that fascinating. And also with proof that they had the scriptures they said they had. So.
Right. That's a good point, is that, there isn't, aside from the testimonies we have at the front, the people that saw it, touched it, we don't have physical proof that there are plates. The Book of Mormon is meant to be accepted on what it is. And the testimony we have of the Book of Mormon is meant to be, and is meant to come through the Spirit, not from some physical proof. Although, I do believe that physical proof will come, right? And that physical proof will be part of what is made plain to the world, that this is true, right? So they can't deny it. And at that point, people will decide whether or not they want to accept the truth or reject the truth. But it'll be plain and obvious.
Brian, I just want to add to what everyone's saying. when I was preparing for the service, when Christ was given his message, Mormon even specifically stated that there were things that even what Nephi had written down on the plates, that God did not allow Mormon to put on the plates from the message that Christ himself gave to the people.
Mm-hmm.
He said, no, like, he knew that we were going to get this book, that the Gentiles were going to get the fullness of the gospel, but he also knew of our unfaithfulness, and that there were things that Christ said to the Nephites there in Bountiful that we don't have today. And he says, hey, if we're faithful, he'll give us that message. There's also the first part of the book that we lost because Joseph mishandled them and they were lost, and who knows what happened with them. We still don't have that either. So who knows what those first pages said? Who knows what detail, if that was Lehi or if that was Ether, or what pages those were that we don't have today. But the purpose of that, and why God did not allow Joseph to go back and retranslate them, was because he didn't want the Book of Mormon to come back and say, well, here's the original pages and you translated it differently. And, just like Ken said, how many different Bibles are there? The King James Version does not have the Book of Enoch, because they said, oh, well, it's not on the scrolls. Well, just because it's not on the scrolls didn't mean it didn't happen. So man, again, tries to make it what they want it to be. And that's what I love about the Book of Mormon also, is the fact that it hasn't changed. And it's not going to change. Because we're not going to go back through and put our own words in it. It is the fullness of the gospel, and it's another testament of Jesus Christ.
And, really, it's important to discuss, why would we spend time with this book? That's really the whole point here, is why would we spend time with this book? Is this because it has this pureness of the gospel, and it's expressed with God's heart, and it's expressed to us, and it was given as a gift to the world. And when we talk about the Book of Mormon to other people, we're really talking about, we're really not trying to, because I've done this before, I felt compelled to start with, the storyline and, explain, all of those things about, the Lehi left Jerusalem and all this stuff, and, talk about the history part. What's going to matter to people is the gospel that's in it, and the things that it teaches, and the things that it clarifies for the world that we don't understand about Christ, that other people have stumbling blocks, other denominations stumble with. And so if we understand and can clearly talk about the things in the Book of Mormon that are unique and special, that helps us have conversations with other people about it. So there's a lot. We'll probably go all over the place. But I wanted to start with the title page of the Book of Mormon, and I went ahead and copied it so you can mark it up. I spilled grape juice on mine this morning, but you might not want to mark up your Book of Mormon in the way that we might hear in a class. So we have the title page of the Book of Mormon, and I just put on top of there, this is a quote from Joseph Smith about the title page. The title page of the Book of Mormon isn't a man-made, isn't a Joseph Smith thing. He wanted to emphasize to everybody that the title page of the Book of Mormon is a literal translation taken from the very last leaf on the left-hand side of the collection or book of plates. So if he was looking at the plates and leafed to the very end, right? Right here, right, was this title page. Left-hand side from the back.
Actually, be at the beginning.
It would be the other way, wouldn't it?
Yeah. It'd be at the beginning.
Because it's Hebrew. Right?
Well, he said it was on the very last leaf,
But
Yeah. But if you're reading Hebrew, they read from
left to right.
left.
Yeah,
But
so
Joseph Smith
so
didn't
the
read
last.
Hebrew.
Huh?
Joseph Smith didn't read Hebrew.
No, but it was written in Hebrew,
But
right?
he didn't.
It wasn't written in
But
Hebrew.
If he said last, he would have been referring to the way he reads books.
Oh.
Yeah.
Also, Mormon likely had the abridgment and likely knew that Joseph was going to eventually read it. again, I don't know if he would have written left to right like he was, but we also don't know, did the Nephites at the time also write the same way? I mean, yes, they were taught Hebrew, but they would have had their own language by then also.
Mhm. Well, this is what,
That I would write differently if I was to write a book, I'd write it the way I write it, knowing that, yes, someone in China might read my writing, but I'm not gonna write it differently for them, because I would write according to how I wrote.
No, you're right, and I certainly agree with what you're saying. I'm just saying, I don't know, I mean, we know how Hebrew is written. We just don't know if that's the way Mormon,
Egyptian Hebrew
Right.
combination.
well, yeah, these, what Joseph Smith wanted to emphasize is that he didn't decide to write a title page summarizing the Book of Mormon for us. That wasn't his purpose. He said he found it at the end of the plates. It was the last thing he saw. And it said, and it's right there, the language of the whole running the same as all Hebrew writing in general. Okay, so that we're sort of getting that they probably sort of thought in that format that we know about Hebrew writing, and that the title page is not his or any other man's who's ever lived now. So the title page was part of the Book of Mormon, and so Moroni took time at the end to talk about the abridgment that he had made, and that he had thought that would be valuable to sort of explain what the plates were about. And so I think that if we're talking about the Book of Mormon and thinking about the things that will help us understand it, the ideas in that title page are important because they come out with Moroni's thought. So what I'm going to invite you to do, and this is the same thing we'll do each time we look at a section, and you'll see that we got another chapter here that we'll talk about next week, is as we read, I would like for you to make marks on that page, okay? Things that either you are interested in talking about or things that you don't understand, right? And so that way when we're done, we can sort of have a natural conversation about parts of that you think are important or that you would like to talk about more. Of course, I've marked mine up, but this isn't Brian talking about this. This is us talking about this. So an easy way to do that is to use mark symbols. So if you want to do this, something that doesn't make sense to you, you can put a question mark by it. Something that you think is really worth talking about, you can put a smiley face by it or a exclamation mark by it or whatever makes sense to you. That's teacher talk there. But it'll help us come back to the things in here that are important to you. Okay? So I'd like to read through all of it, or I'd like to have us read through all of it. And then as we read it, we'll read slowly. Just mark the things that you think are important, interesting, things that you would like to talk about, things that you think are important. Okay? I'll read the first section. Anyone want to read the second section? Since there's sort of paragraphed there.
Second paragraph?
Second paragraph? Okay. An account written by the hand of Mormon upon plates taken from the plates of Nephi. Wherefore it is an abridgment of the record of the people of Nephi and also of the Lamanites, written to the Lamanites, who are a remnant of the house of Israel, and also to Jew and Gentile, written by way of commandment, and also by the spirit of prophecy and of revelation. Written and sealed up and hid up unto the Lord, that they might not be destroyed, to come forth by the power, the gift and power of God, unto the interpretation thereof. Sealed by the hand of Moroni, and hid up unto the Lord, to come forth in due time, by way of the Gentile, and interpretation thereof by the gift of God.
An abridgment taken from the book of Ether also, which is a record of the people of Jared, who were scattered at the time of the Lord, confounded the language of the people when they were building a tower to get to heaven. which is to show unto the remnant of the house of Israel what great things the Lord hath done for their fathers, and that they may know the covenants of the Lord, that they are not cast off forever. And also the convincing of the Jew and Gentile that Jesus is the Christ, the eternal God, manifesting himself into all nations. And now if there are faults, they are the mistakes of men. Wherefore condemn not the things of God, that you may be found spotless at the judgment seat of Christ.
And so if you had an opportunity to take something that you had, in just a few words, say what it's about and what it's for, right? Those words are significant. I think they're very important. They give us sort of like that big idea that we need to remember. So there's pretty important words in there that will help us when we understand the Book of Mormon. So what did you notice? What words or ideas stand out to you that you would like to talk about?
I circled something.
I'm sure I've recognized this before, but the title portion where it says, an account written by the hand of Mormon upon plates taken from the plates of Nephi. Now, that's a weird way to describe the plates. It could have just said upon plates similar to, but it says plates taken from. So it's basically saying that Nephi created these plates for the purpose of the recording that was made. And I believe that's true. And it used to be one of those things that I would point out when we get into the Book of Mormon. You start with, 1st and 2nd Nephi, and as you go through the later, as they begin recording next generation, they wrote less and less. So if plates were made to count for the history, then you find suddenly nobody's recording very detailed history, and you got extra plates left. It didn't say that Mormon forged new plates, and I think we need to watch for that as we go through the Book of Mormon to see if anybody did make more plates, or if they were all made already at one point in time, which would have been even a greater testimony of what God knew was going to happen. That's just an interesting little piece of that.
So we'll see that in this first section, actually, but Nephi talks a lot about the fact that he's limited in space. And so Ray Treat used to talk about that a lot. He talked about that one of the things about the plates was there is a physical limitation to the size, and also it took time to inscribe on plates words. And so when you think about, he called it the purpose principle. If something's in there, it's in there for a purpose, and we should pay attention to that. So they had to really be careful and choosy about what was in and what was not in.
So I guess I have a question. So if it's taken from the plates of Nephi, does that mean that they just like made a condensed version, or like that they actually took plates from and there's more plates somewhere? Does that make sense?
I don't know that this will answer it, but if
You turn to the first 4 verses in the Book of Ether and read through there about what Moroni said about the translation. And anyway, he says, as I suppose that the first part of this record, which speaks concerning the creation of the world and also of Adam, and an account from the time even to the great tower, and whatsoever things transpired among the children of men until that time, is had among the Jews. Therefore, I do not write those things which transpired from the days of Adam until that time, but they are had upon the plates, and whoso findeth them, the same will have power that he may get the full account. So I think that says a lot about how the plates weren't totally transcribed by man. They're still there. They're still waiting to come forth. So, anyway, I thought that might shed a little light on that as well.
Yeah, Moroni talks about, or Mormon, the way I couldn't write the 100th part of what happened. That kind of phrasing is all through the Book of Mormon. I couldn't put it in there. I didn't have space because the purpose of this account is for this, and they're really careful about that. You know, when the Spanish conquered the Mayans, the Mayans had other kinds of writing besides writing on, you know, they had codexes. They wrote on paper and parchment kind of things. That's not going to last, right? So they would have written their accounts, their writing, everyday writing would have been on other things. But the thing that's going to last the millennium until it's picked up by Joseph Smith is going to be something that's permanent. And so everything that's here was purposely put and carefully chosen to be here.
And I would have to look, I'm sorry, Sandy. I'll have to look real quick, but I'm pretty sure that when Helaman handed the plates over to his son Nephi, he specifically stated that Nephi was going to be in charge of the plates of Nephi. It's, each person was different on how he said it. Most of the time, the fathers passing it on to their sons would say they're going to be in charge of the plates. But Helaman specifically stated, and I'd have to search if anyone else did it, but I'm pretty sure Helaman had told Nephi he was going to be in charge of the plates of Nephi.
I was just noticing, the thing that stood out to me was, that, hold on a second. Well, these were the covenants of the Lord, they're recording, they didn't say commandments, the covenants of the Lord. And that they would not be cast off forever. But also, the convincing of the Jew and the Gentile that Jesus Christ, the eternal God, I like that it spells that out, Jesus Christ, the eternal God, they're one and the same, manifesting himself into all nations. I've heard so many times, the Book of Mormon is for the people of the Americas, that they were for the Native Americans, and that's what it was just for. We grew up thinking, okay, they're saying that this is for the Indians only. Well, I don't know that I'm Indian or Native American or First Peoples, whatever the term you want to use. But this says it's for the Jews and the Gentiles and for all nations. So when we get trapped in saying it's only for one certain people, I think we err in that outlook.
So that is really important. The Book of Mormon is part of the way that God will show everyone that the plan that He's had from the beginning is been planned from the beginning, and that all of the things that He has spoken are true, and they are not just to one group. It is the gospel to all people, even though that we know that the covenant that came through Abraham came through him, right? All are adopted into that covenant. I was think about what we know about the house of Israel today. When I read that section. They don't know Christ. There are some that do. Corey has pointed that out, but think if you were a part of the house of Israel now, and knew that you were part of the house of Israel now. I'm not sure you would see God's plan necessarily in what's going on today in their lives. They have a nation, but I'm not sure their hearts are with God. And when this truth goes to them in a way that, however he does that, think about what that will mean, right? This path that this house of Israel has been on since 600 BC, God knew all of it. He predicted, he prophesied all of it, the great swath of history of that group. And he promised that they would come to know it and understand it, and that they would be brought back. What I can't even imagine from their point of view what the Book of Mormon would mean to them, to understand, to look back at their history and to see that it was recorded here, right? It was all laid out here and prophesied here. I just can't. That's not my heritage, so I can't. I just feel like, I just know that that's going to be amazing.
Well, what would someone from Israel think of the Book of Mormon today? I mean, if they, just someone that lives in Israel right now, what would they view the Book of Mormon today? Would they view it as what a lot of people do, that, oh, this is wrong, this is, something from the Antichrist, or whatever it may be. So I agree with you. I try to sit here and imagine, what event will take place that all of a sudden Israel's going to have the fullness of the gospel and believe it. Especially when you look at it today. But Book of Mormon says that the Gentiles will no longer have power over Israel, and there's nothing that Israel would do today that they would not talk to America before they did it. So Gentiles still have the power over Israel, but the time will come, as God prophesied, that it will no longer have the power over Israel. They will be their own. And I'm with you. I think it's going to be fascinating when Israel does get the fullness of the gospel, because again, that's a sign. That's a sign we're looking for. That's what Christ prophesied. That's what we're looking for, and I can't wait for that day.
I worked with some attorneys at the railroad who were Jewish. And we were in a meeting one day, and almost all of our department was Catholic, a small department. And in our discussion about some things, they wanted to know, well, what religion are you, Rex? And I shared with them what I was. And then one of the attorneys, his name's Phil Brown, spoke up and he said, when I told him, he said, well, Rex is the guy that wants to make sure that every Jew has access to the Book of Mormon. And I said, Phil, you're absolutely right. I owe you a Book of Mormon. And I asked him later how he knew that. He said, I don't know, but somebody else had shared with me before about your religion. And he wasn't talking about the Mormons. He was talking about the RLDS church at the time. Okay.
Well, just think about what miraculous things did God do to get us this book, right? And he'll do the same thing. When we read the book of Jacob and we read the testimony of the olive trees and the grafting and all of the things, the moving of the branches, right? Which is just amazing, because it's like the master prophecy. We're told that this book, right, when the Gentiles reject the Book of Mormon, it's gonna go to the house of Israel, right? And if he did these marvelous things to make that happen through man, to get it to us, right, the same marvelous things are gonna happen to get it to them. And so not to say we're gonna sit back and just let that happen. We should always be valiant in our testimony. But this book is gonna go to the house of Israel, right? And it's gonna do this. It's gonna let them know they are not cast off. And the Lord has been with them, and he has guided them, and he has not forgotten them. And the things that he promised them will still come to pass, right? So it's like being lost or being separated from a loved one and thinking they didn't love you and then finding out they loved you the whole time. There's a marvelous work and a wonder yet to come forth among the children of men related to this book.
Well, I want to share a couple of things. One is a testimony. The other one is, you asked about the Book of Mormon. And I think we need to be very careful right off the top, because it isn't the Book of Mormon, it's the testimony of Jesus Christ. And that's the only purpose the Book of Mormon serves, is to bear witness of Jesus Christ. And to make sure that when it's talking about covenants and stuff, it's actually to bring them a knowledge of the truth of Christ. My cousin, who passed away recently, did a lot of orchestrating and writing music for a friend that was, he lives in Israel, performs in Israel, and he's trying to bring a message of Jesus Christ to Israelis. And he was in a meeting once, and this is what he shared, is that they were talking about helping him or not helping him, or allowing him or not allowing him to continue to perform in Israel, because his ministry is Christ-centered. And one of the gentlemen went around behind him and put his hands around his neck and began to squeeze and said, "We only have one problem, and that's this thing you have about Christ." And he said he began squeezing harder and harder. And he didn't know where he was going to go with this. It's almost like he had an intent to do him physical harm. And he said, "Well, I'm sorry. Then we can't discuss further, because if it's not about Christ, I'm not here." And the guy backed off, and they didn't ever give him any kind of financial help, but they did allow him to continue doing what he's been doing. I haven't heard anything recently about it, because I haven't yet had access, because my cousin passed away, but he is preaching and singing Jesus Christ in Israel right now. And he does not have the Book of Mormon. I find it interesting, my cousin did have access to the Book of Mormon, but was raised a Baptist, basically. And so that's never gotten, I thought at some point that it may be that I would have opportunity with this young man to talk about the Book of Mormon even, but that's had not happened yet. But I just have a concern that we don't forget that it's really about bringing everyone to a knowledge of Jesus Christ, and that like it says right here, that he is the eternal God, is the Christ, and is the eternal God both, and that's what they need.
I don't know of any other more Christian book, any book that's more about Jesus Christ than the Book of Mormon. In the Old Testament, there are prophecies and shadows about Christ, but they seem to have missed it. The writers of the Book of Mormon didn't. And they continually, and this is something I love to talk about, right? They continually talked about the coming of Christ. For 600 years, they talked about the coming of Christ. And how often do we hear people scoffing at that, right? You don't know Christ is going to come. How do you know Christ is going to come? You have no idea, right? They had a strong belief that those promises meant Christ. And had a testimony through prophecy that Christ was coming. The Jews didn't have that clarity. Somehow they were stuck on the law.
That was a question that as I was listening to everybody talk, that's the question I had is, where did it break down? Where did because we read, and Christ is foretold in the Old Testament, it's prophesied. Where did it break down that they didn't accept Christ as Jesus as the Christ? Where was the failing?
The Jews?
In that?
The Jews?
Yeah. Because you read through the Old Testament, he's prophesied of it and everything, but where did it, was there, I don't know, maybe it's just time, it just happened, I don't know, but I've thought of that before, and again, it brought to my awareness this morning. Where did it break down?
Cain?
Yes. I guess so. Yeah, I don't know. It's just a thought. I don't have. I guess everybody has their own choice in life. I guess. We could break down today, and have the same experience and not accept Christ. So.
Well, remember that the first testimony of Christ that's here in the Book of Mormon comes from Lehi and Nephi's dream, and they're shown Christ, and they record, in great detail what he's going to be about. And so, if no one is over here praying about that and asking for understanding of prophecy, then they don't get it. And the other thing I wonder is if they had known a clarity about who Christ was, what he would look like, what he would do, and how he would come, that they wouldn't reject him. And that's what that purpose had to be, is that had to be last known.
But the most quoted prophecies of Christ are in the one book that
Isaiah,
ties over the two.
Isaiah 53. Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, 12 tribes. Why was just one tribe that got this? I mean, God could have used any other 12 tribes. Even after Israel was scattered and taken into Babylon, he still could have used, Daniel, he could have prophesied this to Daniel. He didn't. He gave it to Lehi, who was in another world that was going to be brought later. So I asked the same question. Why is it this one tribe? Why is it this one individual, that God chose to take overseas? He knew Israel was going down, but they were eventually going to get it back. But why was it that he saved these people who would eventually be the house of Israel in this land that would never leave? They're still here today.
So we'll have to watch our time. We'll see if we need to.
And we want that job short.
Yeah.
that's my job.
So you have here. So I wanted to make sure we talked about and just had a discussion of these beautiful words about what the Book of Mormon is for, because Moroni tells us. And so that helps us understand when we read what's in there and why. So I wanted to start with 34 verses from 1 Nephi. We can't go, and we'll never have time to go verse by verse, chapter by chapter through the Book of Mormon. And so we'll have to select parts that really stand out to us that we want to talk about. So you're welcome to read over those 34 verses so we can discuss them next week. They're really Lehi's experience that caused him to take his family and go. That's really what these 34 verses are. And so I think that teaches us something about how God works through prophecy and how God speaks to people. So you're welcome to look those over. We'll read them through once together next week, and then we'll sort of talk about what stands out to us about Lehi's experience in those verses. You're welcome to bring the Book of Mormon. Encouraged to bring your scriptures. I'm printing them so you can mark them up and not feel bad about marking them up. So have that. So thanks for joining us today. We'll hop upstairs. It's wonderful to see you all today.
Go watch Larry Hart.